Hey BookTube, I am doing today the Gospel Read-Along hosted by Steve Donoghue. This is, throughout the month, we're reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the four Gospels of the New Testament. I'll link to his video where he gives a much better description of the intent. Basically, it's let's read this as a fresh as document as possible, not in a as a religion or as a kind of a literal word of God, but more as Bible is literature. At least that's my interpretation of it. I haven't looked at their videos yet. I figured, okay, I'm gonna video my inept attempt at this, and then I'll go and see what I was actually supposed to do. But this is hopefully I'll stumble onto something that's actually me versus me just aping much abler minds. I am a complete ignoramus when it comes to this religious stuff. I am an atheist, not some atheist, just more like, yeah, I really don't care. I don't see the point of it. Kind of atheist, I guess, is how you would put me. That said, BA in English literature, so the Bible, especially the King James Bible, which is the version I chose, is something that is influenced literature, and indeed just the Christianity in itself. And this book has really influenced how we think, how we conceptualize the world, the stories we tell. And indeed, this is the hero's journey. If there's ever a hero's journey, it's the story of Jesus and him dying for the sins of mankind and getting resurrected and coming back and telling his disciples to go forth and to spread the word. So it's the big story. I thought it was a worthwhile thing to say, okay, I'm gonna take up the challenge, try and read this with as fresh as eyes that I can hear. And you heareth, but you do not, you see, but you do not understand or hear. Or God, sorry, I'm getting buzzed by flies. I'm sure all the hell and damnation and Beelzebub stuff in the going on there. So yeah, I started off with Gospel of Matthew, which is very much the soup to nuts bio of Jesus, except of course it's instead of death there's resurrection. It's one of these. It's got a lot of box ticking in it. You can definitely tell that this is there's an author here who's responding to other works, who is ticking off all the things of how Jesus fulfills all the prophecies that have come before him. And so stuff like that doesn't particularly interest me. So that felt like this is fan service kind of thing. If you want to get it from a fresh perspective, I guess that's it's like, as someone who's semi disinterested in it, as to this being an actual figure, historical figure who is actually the Son of God. Yeah, that's where you sort of come at it from. Or as I guess someone who was a Star Trek fan would be like, yeah, okay, fine, you're setting up all the stuff with Spock and Kirk, but I just wanted you to get along. Get on to the story and get on to the good stuff. Which of the good stuff is probably like stuff like the Sermon on the Mount, which this is where you get Jesus the disruptor. You can see why this is a fellow who even in this book is so many flies, is shown as a he's trouble. He's like I've come here not as kind of, I've come here as a sword, and it's really a sword to mess up the hypocrites and the generation of vipers and stuff like that he sees all around him. This seems to be very much written in a time of early Christianity, where Christianity was not as distinguishable from the other Jewish traditions that it sprung out of. And you can see that kind of that knocking heads of like, they're saying, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but we're saying, love thy neighbor as thy would love thyself, and just stuff like, you shouldn't commit adultery, but if you commit adultery even in your head, that's as bad as actually committing it, which is asking a lot more of somebody. This Jesus character, he's asking a ton of people, and indeed, I think at some point the disciples are saying like, well, who could do all this? Who could be saved? And he says, well, this is where you can't on your own, but you need this God figure to to help you get through. So, but there is definitely that thing of like a kind of a he's a very challenging guy. I've seen it's funny because it's hard to read this fresh, but I've seen depictions of Christ as very kind of like, oh, he's warm, friendly, caring, kind of gauzy, and then I've seen kind of like, oh, kind of more. What to me, it's funny. I go to the word Old Testament-y, kind of like, I am here to tell you that this is bullshit and we should burn it all down. And this is reading this, just kind of this version of it. It seems to be much more. He's a burn it all down kind of guy, which is a funny thing to say about someone like Jesus. But he's an uncompromising fellow. Also a fellow who's like, it's like against divorce and things like that. It's one of these interesting things of like, how much am I supposed to judge this fictional character created in, I think it was like 70 or to 110 or there's a range in there. This is like second generation Christianity, and it's how much are you supposed to judge this fellow by today's standards. I guess the only way you do is because this stuff is all gotten. We should live our lives this way now. And there's indeed, you look at this book as a character, you go, oh well, there's some interesting, provoking thoughts here, interesting, provoking ideas. It's funny, a lot of the superpower stuff, like the healing of the sick and raising the dead and casting out the devils and stuff like that. It's funny, I'm a fantasy guy, so it's like, oh, this is the fantasy stuff, and this is like, wow, this is all the cool superpowers he has. It's like, that wasn't nearly as engaging to me as him saying, whoever should lose his life for my sake shall find it. Kind of these, the demands he's making on his followers, the kind of moral imperatives that he's coming up with are things. The love thy neighbor as thy love thyself. It's like, I think there was a whole thing of like, what are the core things you should live by, and one of them is like, love and worship only God, and the other one was, love thy neighbor as love thyself, or just that kind of like impetuous of like, you shouldn't just love your loved ones. You should love your enemies. And that's like, wow, that's tough stuff. That's not asking for a little. That's not asking, there's bits in here of like, this is comfort. I'm gonna take your yoke for you, but he's piling a lot on followers, and I can see people who take up this stuff. It's like, this is going to be a struggle. This is going to be a lifelong struggle for them, and so I guess that's my initial reading. Obviously super surface reading of the Gospels. I don't know if I've got anything else. I came not to send peace but a sword. I think I have to say, like with the King James version, the language is what really stands out. That the parables of the mustard seed or the talons. I like this kind of like this technique, which I'm sure probably predates this, but the idea of telling a story and then interpreting the story is there's a lot of like fiction, like of Western fiction in there, where we tell stories and then the reader comes and has to kind of pull out the meaning from it, and it's a way of, I think he says, like, why does he do parables? And his disciples say, like, well, why do you use parables when you're teaching the multitudes? And he says, like, well, that's because the multitudes aren't there to know the mysteries of heaven, like the disciples are, but the multitudes, us yokels, we're not known for that. And it's because the multitudes don't see or hear or understand. And I can see that of like, you can write things out like, love thy neighbor, but if you write a story that somehow can kind of embody that and force someone to kind of put themselves into that and understand what that actually entails and what that means on a very concrete level, that opens up a big world. And that's literature. So that's my That's me getting into that. Finally, maybe at the end here of getting into that idea of this work as a work of literature and what I found in there. So yeah, I'm finding this very engaging, and hopefully I will. Hopefully I will continue on. Hopefully I will actually get to the next one quicker. So I'm not doing it. I'm doing this on. I'm filming this at least on Wednesday. So I'm a very bad booktuber when I should have had this out on Sunday. Now I can actually go watch what Steve and other people have actually said about this book and marvel at their erudition and their depth of knowledge and be ashamed and realize that I am one of the yokels in the back who goes, yeah, I don't get it. All right, more videos later. Bye for now. Oh, and by my own words shall I be condemned.